Okay, next topic with post-Keynesian economics is inflation. Now, let's see. Gone through the idea that Keynes had that the economy is unstable. I need to show you that. Okay. Actually, I just realized I need to show you a different video than I was about to show you. Let me drive home the point about the economy being unstable. Is this it? I think so. Yeah. We can go through this fairly quickly because you already know a lot of it better. Actually, where have I got the one for? I did a talk about the business cycle, but this is a new one here I put together. Okay, yeah. Let's do this one. See how it goes. All right, F5. All right. So let me take what I've told you so far about uncertainty, about the labor market and how it won't clear out, and make sure that everyone has a job that wants a job. Actually, let me show you something on that real quick. Let me illustrate an additional point on the labor market stuff. Okay. Remember I said that Keynes is saying, wait a minute, we're looking at the wrong frickin' variable. Backing up just a little bit, going back to this thing. At some point, the economy must have been here. Oops. Here, W sub 0, N sub 0. So that is full employment. Everyone who wants a job at W sub 0 has a job because it hits the labor demand curve and the labor supply curve at the same point. Now, that's like the 1920s. In the 1920s, everything is awesome. I showed you the data for that, how much lower unemployment was. What was it? Like 4 right before the Great Depression? 4%? 3 point something percent? Let's find out. Let's not just make that up because the data are easy to find. Here they are. 3.2. Unemployment was 3.2% in 1929. Extremely low. All right, lower than we've had even recently when we got really low, and so that's like the 1920s. But then Keynes is going to argue there was a collapse in investment, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But I just want to illustrate an additional point with the labor market. Let's say that investment collapses, and therefore firms don't want to hire as many workers. ND 1930s. Well, the wage rate's still W sub 0. Nothing has happened to move that. All that's happened is that the number of workers that firms want to hire has fallen from N sub 0 to N sub 1. So what have we got left over? That gap there is now, oops, dag nabbit. I made a smiley face. I meant to make a sad face. There's all the unemployed people. And let me kind of make this other curve disappear. Sometimes it can be a little confusing to still see it there. All right, so it's a ghost curve now, right? It used to be here and it moved there, and now we've got that situation that I illustrated on the other 3 graphs where we have involuntary unemployment. So the classical argument was, oh, we should just let the wages fall. Let the wages fall down to here, and now everyone who wants a job has a job. But notice something about that so-called solution. We've got fewer people working than we did in the 1920s. So yeah, it's better than N sub 1. But it's still fewer than we had in the 1920s. The 1920s were W sub 0 and N sub 0. The solution, quote unquote, is W sub 2, a lower wage rate, and a lower level of employment. The 1920s was a period of tremendous technological progress. The 1930s should have been the greatest period in American economic history. We should have enjoyed a higher standard of living. There was no logical reason that in the 1930s we should be settling for W sub 2 and N sub 2 as a solution when we were already at W sub 0 and N sub 0 back before we had so much productivity, back before we had all the roads built and the refineries built and the automobile factories built and so on. So Keynes is saying, oh my God, falling wages isn't a solution at all. It actually still leaves us in a worse situation than when we started. We still end up with, let's see, I'm trying to decide what color to use here. Okay. We still end up with lower employment and lower wages than we had in the 1920s. So yes, in one sense it's a solution in that there's no longer any involuntary unemployment. Everyone who wants a job has a job, but that's because we made wages so low that nobody wanted to work anymore. All right? And so that's not logical. He said the problem was never the wage rate. The problem was always the labor demand curve. The solution is to put the labor demand curve back where it was. And the fluctuations in the labor demand curve are related to fluctuations in investment. All right? There are other factors as well. There always are, but that's the primary one. So think about that. Think about the role of investment in shifting that demand curve back and forth and causing expansions and recessions. That's what I want to show to you next, all right? And that's going to be on this PowerPoint that I almost totally forgot about. All right. So I'll do what I did a minute ago where I zoom in on the screen, which seemed to work very, very well. Zoom. Oh, that's backwards. All right, and this is derived from a talk I gave, good Lord, to the Colleyville Executive Organization. I can't remember now. Anyway, I put it together from various things. All right, and I thought it was interesting to look up on the internet. I'm sitting here looking at the screen. I don't think I can zoom any more than that, can I? I can actually move this a little bit. That might help. All right. I decided to look up, what if you were to look up the definition of a recession, and that is one of the most horrific definitions I have ever seen. This was the #1 hit I got under what causes recessions. A major cause is inflation. Oh my God, what idiot wrote that? There is absolutely, I don't know of a single economic theory that says that recessions result from inflation, all right? And then it explains what inflation is. So there's a tremendous amount of ignorance out there about what actually causes recessions. The #2 one was something to do with, let's see, unexplained shocks. Well, no, we can explain them. We can explain them, all right? Unexplained shocks. Actually, let me turn around here to where I'm facing my screen. I'm trying to look on the monitor, but the monitor actually has some like little icons on there to show me various things about the videoing process, and it means I can't read everything. Unexplained shocks to investment. No. And look at the, we really just don't know the answer. You might not know the answer, but I do, or at least the people in this school thought. Causes of recession. Let's see what we've got here. Negative economic growth, primarily caused by a fall in aggregate demand. Okay, that's a little closer. But once again, it's a shock. A shock. In other words, remember when I told you, and when I read that quote to you from Christina Romer, where she said that really there's no reasons recessions have to happen or business cycles, we could go on forever, except for random shocks. All right, so this is kind of the neoclassical view that the economy fixes itself. All right, that's what's inherent here. And let's see what we got here. Ironically, recessions are not caused by a decline in business confidence. Indeed, business confidence is often its highest right before the recession. Again, we'll be going through this in just a moment. Oh, and then here's that Christina Romer thing again, where it says that we could stay at full employment forever. All right. So first I want to show you, here we've got the unemployment over time. And notice that unemployment clearly falls during expansions. The shaded areas are recessions. Falls during expansions, rises with a lag around recessions, falls during expansions, Rises, falls, rises, falls. All right. So point being that there's a very high correlation between economic expansion and low unemployment and economic recession and high unemployment. I think you knew that, but it's nice to see the numbers. All right. It's nice to see the actual numbers to show you. Look at this track here. We don't need to have a econometrics class to come to the conclusion that they're highly correlated. So what's causing it? All right. Well, and this was a talk I did for idiots, which is the word I use for people who aren't economics majors. You all understand it much better with you don't need all the background and stuff, so I'm going to sort of skim over some of this stuff. But what I'm explaining first is that jobs are created by spending, which we just saw. Oops. We just saw that. Total spending is GDP growth. So GDP is expanding here, contracting, expanding, contracting, expanding, contracting. I say contracting while going up, but that's because this is unemployment. When spending is contracting, unemployment's going up. So jobs are created by spending. And at any given moment, there must be some level of GDP that would generate full employment. And let's just assume it's 20 trillion, all right? For sake of argument, I wanted to use some real numbers with people, and rather than just talk in generalities. And what I got 2015 data, which showed that consumption spending was 12 trillion that year, investment was 3 trillion, government spending was about the same, and net exports were just about zero, really a half a trillion there. And so notice if we add all that up, well, maybe I did that in the next line. Oh, well, okay, well, let me back up here. If you add that up, you've got about 18 trillion, a little bit less than that because of the negative 500 billion. So we get about 18 trillion, and I was saying, hey, let's say, for sake of argument, that full employment is 20 trillion. How can we get there? All right, so we're currently at 18 trillion. And actually, let's make it simpler. Let's just talk about, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, let's talk about each kind of spending one at a time. So what can help us get to that 20 trillion? How does consumption work? And you already know the answer to this. It is, unfortunately, consumption tends to follow the business cycle rather than cause the business cycle. The most important determinant, as you already know, of consumption is income. And the more income you have, the more consumption you have. So, and as income goes up, it creates spending, and spending creates more income. And you think, whoa, this is going to really help us in expansion. Except that households are net savers. And so the problem here is that in 2010, households saved 20% of total income. So if we generate, remember my magic number here that I just made up off the top of my head, my magic number is 20 trillion. Let's say we reach 20 trillion. Let's say we're at 20 trillion. Yay, full employment. But the problem is that people will only spend of that 16 trillion. All right, 80% of that. I'm assuming here about 80% of what households earn in income they spend. So that means that the next time period the economy actually contracts. Let me say that again. Even if we reach 20 trillion in GDP, the fact that households are net savers means that next time period they won't spend all of that. All right. So we've got 20% times 20 trillion is going to be 4 trillion. And 80% times 20 trillion is going to be 16 trillion. We're only going to put 16 trillion back into the economy. We can't depend on consumption to be the driver, because consumption tries to save. Consumption tries to hold on to some of that money. We need it back in the system again. We need it rolled over again, as we're seeing here during the COVID. And then I show some data on consumption by quintile, which I already mentioned to you in an earlier, I started to say episode. And what I've taken to using as an example here with lay people is to think of 20 trillion as sort of a line on a bucket, and savings as a leakage. All right, which is actually technically what we will call it in intermediate macro, a leakage, because savings drains away total GDP because it means that it doesn't get injected back into the system. All right. Now notice at some point the water level would be down to where the spigot is, and it would stop leaking. But the problem is there that we're also impoverished. We're spending every penny we've got. So we don't want to be down there. We want to be up here at 20 trillion. So how are we going to stay at 20 trillion? Well, yeah, consumption's not enough. and let me skip over actually to this. We have to have water coming in order to maintain this level. If we're going to have leakages, we've got to have an injection in order to stay at the same level. If saving represents a leakage out of the bucket, then we got to have something pouring more water into the bucket. And what is that? That is investment. All right. Oh, look, here's the data I was telling you about earlier. Consumption would be 16 trillion, so we're going to have a shortfall of 4 trillion unless we have a continuous, sustainable increase every year of 4 trillion. Now, let's see, what have I got the next one? First time I was going over this talk and I was showing Melanie, and she immediately said on this slide, but what's the guarantee that firms invest 4 trillion every year? Nothing. That's the problem. All right. So we can't stay at 20 trillion. We can't stay at full employment if there's this constant leakage, which is okay. We want there to be a leakage. We want people to be able to have savings and to have safety for the future. And so if we're going to have enough water in here to generate a leak over here, which is our savings, we've got to have water coming in continuously. So the question is, how likely is it that firms will continuously add spending via investment? And there it is. In fact, when Melanie said, well, how likely is it? I said, well, that's the next slide. It's not very likely. Investment, physical investment, is extremely expensive. It is a very long-term commitment. No one says, hey, let's start a restaurant for a couple of months, see how it works out. No. You're starting a restaurant, you're in this for the long haul. It's practically irreversible. Hey, the whole restaurant thing didn't work out. Let's make it into a shoe store instead. That's possible, but it's really expensive. So it's practically irreversible. And the last point, uncertainty. All right? So you've got all these things working against entrepreneurs investing. It's very expensive. It's a long-term commitment, practically irreversible, and we operate in an environment of uncertainty, which, as I showed you before, is like the 4 dice. We don't have enough information to make a conclusive argument about what we should be doing. And then I'm not going to go through this, and this is a much worse example, I think. I came up, the example I used for you guys I thought was much better. But this is basically a substitute for the example of going to the registrar's office and rolling the die to see if you can get a passing grade in the class. All right, so I was just explaining to the audience with my old system how uncertain the investment environment is. So why do people invest at all? Animal spirits. All right, and so we've got this constant battle between the objective fact that it's impossible to make reliable forecasts regarding the long-term, extremely expensive and irreversible decisions, and the subjective, spontaneous optimism that causes the entrepreneur to think, what the hell, I'm going to give it a shot. It's constantly fighting back and forth. And so that's why, here, we've got a very unstable flow coming in here. And as I said earlier, investment is the most unstable component of GDP. You can have people suddenly shut the thing off. Oh, I should show you some data. You ought to see the investment data from, this is what? August 5th, 2020. And we've just had the latest GDP figures and investment figures after the COVID crisis. And so let's see here. What should I look for it under? I may have to search my email. I subscribe to the announcements of investment, as I'm sure you all do as well. So I've searched for the word investment. Bingo, found it. Okay, check this out. So this is at the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, and this is investment spending. Now let me shorten the time period a bit so we can see it better. Let's go up to 1980. Or maybe right in here. Now it's very slight here, but investment tends to fall before a recession. It's much more pronounced here. Investment's already coming down about a year before the recession happens, which of course is what Keynes is arguing, is that investment falling is causing the recession. Likewise over here, and over here, and John Harvey was calling this. He said we're about to have a recession because investment is really dropping off. And then we had the COVID stuff, so we absolutely had a recession. But look, even before COVID. The precipitous drop is from COVID. But even before that, let me zoom in even further. Even before that, negative, negative, negative. We'd already have 3 negative turns in investment. And so this is exactly what we're talking about over here. Let's see where my PowerPoint is again. Oh, I got 2 up. That one. And Shift and F5. Okay. This is very unstable. It is so dependent on that battle between the fact that investment is really scary. It's expensive, it's long-term, it's practically irreversible, and we don't have sufficient information because the world is fundamentally uncertain. But on the other hand, maybe I can make it work. And that maybe I can make it work sometimes, like during the expansion of the 90s, everybody decided they were a freaking genius because when the market's going up, and this applies to the stock market as well, so I'm going to give you a stock market example. When the market was going up in the 90s, a monkey could put together a portfolio and have it be successful. In fact, a number of monkeys became very wealthy during that period. But you could use a dartboard, and because all the stocks were going up, then people were convincing themselves, I'm some kind of genius. I can remember this going on back then. People, well, I've put together a new system. Oh, geez, your new system could be, throwing crap on the ground and see which stocks it covered up and then buying those because they were all going up. Some faster than others, but the stock market went up by 20% in real terms for 5 consecutive years, which is impossible to sustain. But everyone decided they were a genius. So you can imagine what the animal spirits do then. Oh my God, but let's pull the trigger on this because I think I know what I'm doing. But then when it turns and it goes the other way, then people panic. They're like, you know what? Way down in my gut, this is what Keynes says in the general theory. It's like down in your gut, I didn't really know what the hell I was doing, and I better get out of here because when those prices start going down, the fact that prices have fallen is not in and of itself a problem. Let me show you something over here. Let me put the screen or the camera back up a little bit. I'm not going to go all the way back up. I'll see if I can hit this. Let's see. See right in here? Okay. And here's your stock price over here. All right, so stock is going up, 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 up. Crash. If you bought here, all you need to do, this is time period, say, 5 and time period 10. If you bought here, even if you think it's going to turn, the game is to sell before this. You don't have to sell before the turn. Be good if you did, that'd be great. But you're just sitting, waiting, waiting, waiting. And when the turn happens, hey, if you sell in here, you made money. All right. So, when the turn happens, there are people waiting to jump, and there are people who are deciding, oh my God, why did I do that? I was some kind of idiot. I didn't do that. And so that was a good thing. All right. So during the recession, the entrepreneurs are pessimistic. However, as the recession drags on, the bad memories begin to fail. More importantly, both firms and consumers reach a point where they are forced to start. So let's think about the business cycle. Let's start during the recession. During the recession, everyone's sad. But then as the recession drags on, firms are forced to start replacing equipment rather than just repairing. Households are forced to buy a new car instead of keep repairing it. Because, okay, we have 5 registers at our store. 1 broke. Well, we'll just run with 4 registers. Another one breaks. Well, another one breaks. Well, we just need to buy new registers. So that will spur the beginning of the expansion. All right. And so in here, there's no periods. So here's the recession way over here on the left. Here's early expansion. I've broken expansion into 3 sections, early, mid, and late. And early expansion tends to be a surprise to entrepreneurs. They're still depressed, but they find out, whoa, sales went up. And why did sales go up? People are starting to replace stuff. Eventually you have to replace. Sales are starting to go up. So people are pleasantly surprised. You know what a pleasant surprise does in an environment of uncertainty? What the hell? Let's roll the dice again. All right? That's what a pleasant surprise does in an environment of uncertainty where we don't have these statistical tables we can use to decide what is and isn't, you know, a reasonable expectation, where we're depending on the balance between the animal spirits and the dangers that are inherent in the investment process. So, and by the way, statistically, this is the period when profits rise by the highest percentage. Now, part of that is quite logical because profits really sucked back in here, right? So, you know, any increase is going to be good, but nevertheless, this comes as a surprise. It's like, wow, these are really big jumps in profits. So, what do entrepreneurs do that maybe a few lucky ones were, you know, here firms are in replacing equipment, consumers are replacing their old car, their old refrigerator. And so this second period here, they're like, man, let's get at it, all right? That, hey, it looks like the expansion's here. We had a big quarter last quarter. We saw really high sales. Let's start investing. So now you've got investment going up, then through the multiplier, raising GDP, and then via that process, raising employment. So that's what's happening here. At first, it's a bit of a surprise, and then there's this, and this is the longest period in here. An expansion's like 5 or 6 years. I mean, the last one was like, I don't know, 11, and the one before that, 10, so that's going to extend the average, but before that, 6 years on average. So we got like a year, 4 years, and a year, roughly speaking. So this is a long period here where firms are really getting at expanding capacity, replacing equipment, upgrading things, and because they're spending that money, that creates income in the rest of the macroeconomy that then gets spent. And so their high expectations are satisfied. What they expected to have happen did happen because they were investing. They created the demand that then purchased their goods and services. But investment's going to fall. Remember I showed you on the graph just a second ago, or on the is it a graph? The time series for physical investment. I showed you just a minute ago that investment tends to fall before a recession. Why? Well, we only need so many new restaurants. So through this period, we're building restaurants through this middle period of the expansion. And but you don't want to build restaurants forever. In fact, building a restaurant makes you no money whatsoever, and in fact, instead puts you in debt. So what you're really hoping to do is to open the doors. So people are stopping building restaurants in here at the end, and they are therefore laying off construction workers. They are therefore laying off, or indirectly causing a drop in sales in bricks, in mortar, and in lumber, and so on. So when they open their doors up in here, and especially right in here, when they open their doors, they're disappointed. You know, that they were building here in the middle. They're opening their doors up in here, and because they have all collectively stopped investing, they've actually lowered GDP. Remember, through the multiplier process, they've lowered GDP. And entrepreneurs are taking on a great deal of debt. They are eager to stop building and start selling. But because investment is falling, sales are falling. Projects that are coming online also face more competition. Think about that. The restaurant that opened down here faced much less competition than the restaurant that opened up here. So we're having a number of forces that are leading firms to reduce investment, not because they're disappointed, not because they're pessimistic. They're actually quite excited. They're looking forward to opening those doors and making some money. And for people who finished their projects earlier, that's what happened. They opened their doors and they made some money. But for the people that opened their doors up here, they're disappointed. They didn't make the sales they thought they were going to make back when they made the forecast. So projects coming online face more competition. Panic. I told the board if we opened 10 new franchises, they'd earn an average profit of 7%. The first 5 are done, but are only averaging 5%. Stop building. And this is a point Keynes made in the general theory. He said that the profit rates that firms are earning in here are probably not bad. They would have been happy about them back in here, but the problem is it's not what they expected. It's not that they overinvested. It's that they invested with too high an expectation of what they would actually earn. So when they get up in here, because they didn't earn what they expected to earn, despite the fact that the earnings aren't bad, it nevertheless can lead to panic because we're in that world with the two dice and the two covered up dice that we don't know what's on them. And we're thinking, crap, this isn't working out right, and I ain't making any more of these long-term commitments. We're getting the hell out of here. So we stop investing. And yeah, woe is me, I didn't expect this. Let's go back to, let me slide my chair over here. And also got the chair from, I told you that I got the whiteboard from when we were all in a trailer and they tore down the trailer on campus and instead replaced it with Scarborough, which was nice. But they told us we could keep our whiteboards and we can keep our chairs. So this is my chair from the old office. All right, it's kind of hard to see here because the numbers are smaller. And in fact, I have a number of papers. This is one of my favorite topics, business cycles. But investment is falling before the 54 recession. Investment is falling before 58. It is very clearly falling before 1960, before 1970, and not before 1974. You know what happened right in here? OPEC oil crisis. So here was an external shock, absolutely. Investment had drifted down a quarter before, but as you can see, actually came back up a little bit. And then wham, OPEC oil embargo. So that one doesn't fit, but for a very logical reason, the OPEC oil embargo starting in October of 73. Then over here, we have a decline before the recession in 80. Not over here, because this is where the Fed was intentionally trying to cause a recession. And so they jacked up interest rates to historic levels. And on and on. If you go through all these investment data, then some of them are rather subtle, some of them are not. Look at this one here at the end of the 1990s. Here you can see a pretty steep decline. It kind of levels off after that. But now, you can have a decline in investment without a recession, but you rarely get a recession without a decline in investment. Let's see here. Let's go back to this. Yeah, that of the 9 expansions since 1950, investment decelerated in every single one but one. The exception was during the Vietnam War when there was some government spending going on. And profits slowed in late expansion. And this is during the expansion, not for the recession. Obviously, investment decelerates during the recession. We're talking about during the expansion. At the very end of the expansion, what happens? Let's see here. Yeah, not the result of self-fulfilling prophecy. Don't happen because of overinvestment. They're not random shocks. Shocks can happen, but we don't need them. Oh, and then here I am showing these people what investment spending does before a recession. And then how do you offset that? What do you do about the fact that the one that's pumping in investment is unstable? You pump in another one to offset that. All right, this is what the PostKeynesians are going to argue. We have to have the government offsetting the instability from the investment, and in a very particular way, which you'll read about in the book. And okay, I'll come back to that later. All right, all right. No. I should go ahead and do it now. Even though it comes later in the book, I think that probably it makes sense to address this now. All right. Now, how do you finance this government spending? All right, how do the post-Keynesians say, well, what if we run out of money? What if the government runs out of money? What do we do then? This is what they're talking about that right now, that we can't continue to support the private sector because the government might go bankrupt. What do the post-Keynesians say about that? I'm glad you asked that question. Now, taxes ain't going to do it. We can't get the money for this spending right here. This is the government offsetting the fluctuations in investment up here in order to keep us at 20 trillion. This is the government doing it. And in order to finance that, we can't finance it via taxing households because then they will lower consumption spending. We can't tax businesses. They'll lower investment. The only other choice is deficit spending. To spend more than the government takes in taxation, because only that is a net injection of income into the macroeconomy. Now, you've heard all these terrible stories, I know, about how, what's this? We don't spank them anymore. We just tell them how much they owe to the national debt. That is not true. Happy Independence Day, U.S. debt owned by China, okay, which is actually like 7%. All right. So I'm going to take 2 steps here to explain the post-Keynesian view on this. The first is about budget deficits and surpluses. And the question is, aren't budget surpluses good? Shouldn't we want budget? Remember the end of the Clinton administration, they look, from deficit to surplus for America's future. Yeah. Think of it this way. What if there's 2 people in the economy, Alfred Marshall and Adam Smith? And at the end of the year, Marshall has paid Smith $100 for various goods and services. And Smith has paid Marshall $150 for various goods and services. So Smith has a deficit of $50 and Marshall has a surplus of $50. Which person would you rather be? And when I ask this and birthday parties and shopping market openings, people say, I'd rather be Alfred Marshall. That's right. And that's who you are. Because if the government has a deficit, then by definition, the private sector has a surplus. Every deficit has to be offset by a surplus. You have a deficit with respect to somebody. If we added up every trade deficit on the planet, every trade balance on the planet, if we added all these surpluses as a positive number and deficits as a negative number, and students always get this exactly right, actually even people that aren't economists get this exactly right, if we added up every trade balance on the planet, what number do we get? We get 0. Because for every surplus, there must be a deficit. You have a surplus with respect to someone, you have a deficit with respect to someone. So if the government has a deficit, if the government spent more than they earned, then somebody must have earned more than they spent. And that's the private sector. That's exactly what that means. That is why, backing up one more, I believe, yeah. That is why the deficit spending is a net injection right here. All right, so going back to this again. Yeah, all right. If the public sector spends more than it earns, then it must be true that the private sector earns more than it spends. When the government runs a budget surplus, it drains income from the private sector by taxing away more money than it injects. You should see, I don't think I put that in this one. No, you should see the numbers on private sector debt at the end of the Clinton administration when they ran those surpluses. It was horrific. Private sector debt skyrocketed. And of course it did. Because the government taxed more money away from households than they injected through spending. It's really quite simple and logical if you think of it that way. So let's see. Don't worry about that one. And then here's this article that's been cited so many times now. And I believe it's a bit of an exaggeration, but it is basically arguing that those Clinton surpluses were terrible for the U.S. economy, that they drained people's incomes away. And again, all you got to do is look at the data, and you can see the private sector debt skyrocketed. And we already had a deficit with respect to the rest of the world, and now the private sector also had a deficit with respect to the government, because the government had a surplus. All right, I don't remember why I put, hey look, well you can't see that. I don't remember why I did George Takei here for this question. But okay, so let's say you're with me so far, or with the post-Keynesians I should say, that surpluses are a way of, good Lord dog. I'm going to have to go see to him. Hang on.